Now probably we all know that watercolors can come in these small little pens in a variety of different colors. But there's also watercolors in tubes, right? And as a liquid in bottles. So what is the difference? Let's find it out today. Now watercolors in pens are made out of pigments, binders, and different additives and come in small plastic pens. You can get them in half and full pens, and you can buy them either in a set or individually. So if you buy a set of watercolor pens, they usually come with a mixing palette and are ready to go because they basically only require a little bit of water to be activated. To activate the paint, add a little bit of water on top of the paint to pre-wet it. And then you can load up your brush with paint and either just immediately start painting using the paint on the brush, or you can place the paint into the mixing palette in order to adjust the intensity or to mix the desired color. But since you need to go back and forth until you get as much paint as needed for the painting, it can take longer to prepare the right amount on your mixing palette. This means it can take a lot longer to mix a certain color. But at the same time, you will only use as much paint as you actually need. Also keep in mind that using watercolor pens can be a little bit hard on the brushes. So you need to be careful when you load up your brush with paint and not really scrub too much, which can really be damaging for the bristles. I don't know about you guys, but my watercolor pen set is usually pretty dirty and even the colors are not as pure as they used to be. Because you have to go back and forth and sometimes the brush isn't as clean as you thought it is. So when you want to keep the paint really pure and bright and clean, you need to make sure to keep the palette and the colors clean by cleaning it from time to time. And because watercolor pens are so easy to use, you will probably use it a lot and run out of paint really quickly. Because compared to watercolors in tubes, you have a lot less paint. But of course, if you run out of paint, you can simply replace the paint with a new pen, or you can also squeeze the paint from the tube inside the empty pen and then just let it dry. This way you can even create your own customized watercolor palette. Even though it can take a while to get the right color and the right amount of paint, watercolors in pens are fast and simple to use. You can store them really easily, you can take them on the go, and if you have a water container, you can just take a watercolor set and go outside and paint the nature. I think I should go outside more often. I haven't seen nature in a while. And then we also have watercolors in tubes. Watercolors in tubes are more cream-like form of watercolors, also made out of pigments, binders, and additives. And you can get it in different amounts from 5 to even 37 milliliters. And like watercolor pens, you can get them in a set or individually. As a lot of watercolor tube sets don't really come with a mixing palette, you will need to buy yourself a mixing palette with wells and a mixing area. And to get started, you will have to set up a few colors first. Squeeze the paint onto the palette and depending on the intensity of the color you're going for, add water to the paint. The more water you add, the lighter the color becomes. Since the paint is already rather liquid in the tubes, it dissolves really easily in water. And because it's so pigmented straight from the tube, you can adjust the intensity with the right water to paint ratio a lot quicker. But for maximum color intensity, you can use the paint without adding any additional water. And because you only need to squeeze out the paint onto your mixing palette, it's a lot easier to prepare a bigger amount of paint in the color of your choice. This is especially great if you want to create a large art piece and you need a lot of paint. But at the same time, it can be more difficult to judge how much paint you actually need. So you might end up with excess paint that dries out on your palette. But of course, you can reactivate it with water again and just keep painting. How well depends on the brand's formula. And some people even create their own customized palettes by squeezing out the tubes into the mixing palette or empty cases. Then they let it dry and use them as normal watercolors in pens. And if you only squeeze the paint when you need it onto your mixing palette, it's a lot easier to keep your colors clean. Even though it feels scary to buy a watercolor tube because it's a lot pricier, but watercolors in tubes are a lot more economical compared to the pens. And they're a lot cheaper in the long run. But the important thing with watercolors in tubes is that you need to make sure that you close the lid properly so the paint doesn't dry out inside the tube. And to make sure you can actually reopen the tube, make sure that the opening of the tube is also clean so the lid can't get stuck and make it difficult to remove it later. And finally, we have the liquid watercolors. Liquid watercolors can be either pigment or dye-based. Here again, you can get it in separate bottles or as a set. And the lids usually have a pipette, so it's easy to distribute the liquid. As the name already suggests, liquid watercolor is liquid. This means you can immediately start painting, which makes it also great for illustrations and hand lettering. In order to not only keep the colors clean, but also mix the colors together if necessary, you will also need a mixing palette. This way you can add as much liquid as you need into the mixing palette, and then you can adjust the intensity or mix any color you like while keeping the original color clean. And because they're liquid in a rather big bottle, it's easy to use a large amount of liquid and adjust the intensity by adding water to the mixing palette. And if you have any excess paint left, still a clean original color, you can simply pour it back into the bottle. Even though liquid watercolor is very vibrant, if you mix a certain color together, you might end up creating a lot duller colors in the end because liquid watercolors don't reflect the light the same way as normal watercolors do. But liquid watercolors are, compared to regular watercolors in tubes and pens, not real watercolors. Because a lot of liquid watercolors are dye-based, which means that the color will fade over time. And because a lot of liquid watercolors are dye-based, they rather stain the paper, which will prevent you from using certain watercolor techniques such as lifting. Compared to normal watercolors that can be transparent, semi-transparent, a little bit opaque, liquid watercolors are completely transparent. And lastly, if that's an important issue for you, liquid watercolors are not really travel-friendly either. Even though I think if you add the liquid watercolor into an aqua brush, you can take it on the go and maybe hand letter or sketch something. That would work too. Brilliant. All in all, it depends on what you personally prefer because there are a lot of people who just work with watercolors in pens. Some people only use watercolors in tubes, but of course you can combine them and use them together. But I will be careful with liquid watercolors because I will be too afraid that I will create something very pretty, but it will just fade over time. I personally started out with watercolors in pens, and once I got familiar with watercolors, eventually I upgraded to a few colors in tubes that are high quality, and I think it's a good investment because I really love the colors and I have a lot more paint for a lot less money. If you have any other questions that I haven't covered in this video, feel free to comment down below so we can help each other out. Thank you guys so much for watching, have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon. Bye!